have with us today two experts on this program, Caleb Bell and Philip Angelo. Caleb Bell is a partner and chair at Bricker and Eckler's Public Finance Group. His practice emphasizes public-private development work, including bond counsel work and economic development work for projects large and small. He has extensive experience establishing and managing new community authorities, NCAs, as well as Ohio's other economic development tools like abatements, TIFs, JEDs, special assessments, and port authorities. And Philip Angelo is a director in the Public Finance Group at Huntington Bank and sits in the Cleveland office. Since joining Huntington in 2016, he has worked on a multitude of development-related projects across Ohio, including the Amazon Distribution Center's Cleveland Cliffs HBI plant in Toledo, the Cleveland Athletic Club redevelopment, and the Crystal Clinic. Prior to joining Huntington, Mr. Angelo held public sector positions with Cuyahoga County in the executive office for the president. Mr. Angelo obtained his law degree and master's in public administration from Cleveland State and his undergraduate from Ohio University. Before we turn it over to Caleb and Philip, I just wanted to remind everybody to please feel free to drop your comments in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them here today. All right, I think a natural place to start, Caleb and Philip, is if we could start with the question of what exactly is this program, the new community authority, and why is it beneficial for the folks on the phone?
Well, great. Well, thanks for having us, and we'll get into it. So what is a new community authority? It's a great question. Ohio's laws for a long time have focused on the big entities, the counties, the cities, the school districts, the townships. And a lot of times there's a need to have a little extra enhancement at a local directed level for projects and a tax overlay tool that is primarily driven at infrastructure development has been under statute since the 1960s, and that's called the New Community Authority Statute. And it's codified in Ohio Revised Code 349. And this law, what it does is it allows for communities to target development in an area and to create a tax overlay in that area that creates tax revenue, and then it drives it right back into that space. So these taxes that are created by community authorities, they're additive to regular taxes. So unlike with TIF, where you have a diversion of other people's taxes to fund your sites, new community authority taxation is really extra, it's added. And so the concept really is how do you take a site and really enhance it, make it better, use the powers of taxation to create extra revenue to enhance it. I think that it's really a community-driven tool fundamentally, but of course, how do we get our developments done? We work with partnerships with developers. And so this statute establishes a direct partnership between the developer who owns and controls that land in the area and the community. So that's a high-level overview. Phil, what are your thoughts about how community authorities have been used for infrastructure finance?
Yeah, you know, I mean, one of the incredible parts of the NCAs is they really allow, you know, for some of these projects require a significant amount of infrastructure, and they provide a mechanism where you can, you know, finance that, and so it's not as burdensome on, you know, the developer initially. So, you know, what it does is it creates a lot more flexibility for these developers when it comes to, you know, as far as financing tools. And as you can see in the graphic there, it also allows them to, you know, instead of making, you know, Levitt towns, for example, you know, across, which nothing against those, but they're not the most, you know, sightly. You know, this way they can afford to make, you know, further improvements in streetscapes, lighting, you know, fountains, for example, you know, upon entrances, you know, and this is for housing subdivisions, or it can be for, you know, other uses. So yeah, it's been a tremendous tool that is, you know, as I think we're going to discuss, has been widely used Columbus on south and is not really yet made, except for one instance, its movement here up north.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as you can see here with the imagery, the idea is enhancing, right? It's taking what, you know, is really the same number of homes in the same area, but being able to use, tax tools to do better infrastructure, better designed infrastructure, get at community goals like open space, get at expensive things like community facilities, buildings. Those items can really enhance the walkability of a neighborhood or the use of the primary asset, whether it's single family like in these pictures or something more commercial. We often see community authorities in garage financing. I mean, garages are a hard asset to finance, and so really using this to enhance otherwise existing taxation is what's going on. Another thought in all of this is that a community authority charge, the tax that's levied within the space, it's kind of like a user fee. The people who pay it are the people who use the asset. They're the ones who live there, or they're the beneficiaries of that asset. And that concept of creating the ability to do spot-specific user fees is really what I think has made this tool work across the state. Because instead of borrowing from the general population of a town, what we might do is just focus the high level of activity in the new part of the town and not burden the existing residents of the rest of the town with this, the enhancement. So we'll get into some of the examples here, but, Phil, you were mentioning some of the things that are eligible. One of the things that you and I do a lot is bond finance. So I think there's a unique part about community authorities where you can do taxable bond finance or tax exempt bond finance. What are some of your thoughts there about, the types of things that get financed?
Yeah, so, we frequently see it done on a tax exempt basis. So that's, your financing is more kind of public infrastructure improvements. Just to how it works is essentially, there is this assessment or community development charge, which is basically what pays, debt service on bonds, and it can go out, let's just say 30 years. And so what we're able to do is we're able to kind of, monetize that revenue stream. And what it does, it delivers the developer upfront financing. So, they don't have to, put as much equity as they might, and so what it does is, a lot of times these things, gosh, do we really need to, they're all essential items, but, they're not where they're going to be generating, right, the revenue. So the NCA kind of allows, I think, it allows these to be financed in a more efficient way where it's not as burdensome on the developer. So really what it does, in my opinion, is it allows a lot of these developments to even happen. As of like Caleb and I are actually working on one in Richmond Heights, where it's a tremendous undertaking repurposing that mall to what the guys want to do. And in order to do that, there's significant infrastructure that has to be financed. And I mean, candidly, it doesn't work without this mechanism, so, that was tax. We also do it taxable. So, if there's private improvements that are not kind of community-esque, we can also, sell bonds on a taxable basis, which, again, at the end of the day, your rate is not going to be as good as tax exempt, but it's still, pretty good. And it's still, if these guys are maxed out on kind of what they can get from a construction loan, or, it's certainly better than more equity or a mezz financing. It's just a very efficient tool that, again, enhances the community and the development.
Yeah, and you see here on the screen the example of the Bell Oaks Community Authority, which has been formed in Richmond Heights. This project is an old mall, the Richmond Heights Mall, and taking the area of Richmond Heights and partnering with a developer, and then enabling spot-specific community charges are the mechanisms. Those are the ingredients to create a walkable, more urban dense neighborhood in this particular area, and still preserve access to things like commercial and retail on some elements of the site. So this particular development is midstream, so we're right in the middle of this process. But this development will have several hundred multifamily housing units. It'll have some commercial and retail. The parking facilities and the internal road network are really the assets that the community charge will be used to fund. Those items are not present at this site, so that's an expensive add. But if you can leverage that future revenue, like Phil said, you can get there. I did want to mention a few kind of points about community charges, because I think this idea of what is it, how does a community charge really work is really important. Community charges are, they're basically just like property taxes if the charge is a millage-based charge or a dollar-based charge. So the property where the development is has a recorded instrument, a declaration, and that declaration establishes community charges. And so the property can bear 2 mills, 5 mills, 10 mills of property tax. And that revenue stream is the revenue stream that Phil's mentioning would be monetized. You could also do a dollar-based charge, $1 million per year, if you wanted to do that. The statute permits that. We have a couple examples as well of other types of charges, like sales tax charges, where if you had an operating facility that was sales tax heavy, like a functioning mall, you might have a spot-specific sales tax, and then you use that sales tax revenue to create these improvements. So just wanted to mention some of those particulars because the community charge statute permits some flexibility, and that's really where community partnership with developer coming together to determine what the needs are. You can then get into the weeds on how the charge is structured and how it pays for assets.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, the NCA is such a powerful tool that, I mean, candidly, this Richmond deal, it would not, I think, it would not be going to the level that it will with the number of units being built, with some of, just modifications and beautifications of the area, candidly, that they're doing without the ability to have, some form of repayment. I think the important thing too is, I think as Caleb mentioned, it's site specific. So, this is not going to be levied across your entire community. So people that aren't living here, that aren't enjoying these things, they're not going to have to pay for it. So it really just comes from those in the community who knowingly, when they, agree to live here or buy a house, whatever, fully disclosed, aware that this is there, but to them, it's a great trade. I mean, they're getting, rec centers, they're getting, boulevard type roads, they're getting a lot of enhancements that I think, make their community a better place to live.
Thanks, guys. I want to make sure we're getting to some of the questions too. The first one that came in from Brenda was on one of the first couple of slides. I know you had some depictions of some residential properties there, and her question was if those depictions are with the same area and same number of homes and size homes there. I don't know if we can pull that one back up and explain how that's mapped out for us.
I don't know if those are the exact same. I think it's just to illustrate what with an NCA, what we see frequently versus without an NCA, what you're likely to see. Again, the image on the right, looks like it's, a golf course in California. I mean, that's how, but that could be anywhere. That's what the NCA kind of allows it to do. Whereas, the one on the left, and again, nothing against it, but, there's just different, I think, attractiveness to one of them.
And Phil, what's the thing that we're not saying? The thing that we're not saying is developers aren't going to pay that cost for the extra amenity themselves, right? They are willing to create this kind of deeper economic situation, but they have to have the tools to do it. And if you are a community planner or a mayor or a city manager and you want to get quality at your space, you need to be able to have these types of tools in order to bring it there. That's kind of one of the things we're not saying, right? Right.
And to further that point, maybe we're going to talk about in a little bit, is you're doing that and it's not coming out of, the municipality's coffers. It's not from their tax revenue. This is wholly owned within the site that is generating this revenue.
I want to get into a couple of these examples because there's also a huge amount of benefit for commercial as well as mixed use. You saw Confluence Community Authority, which was from Central Ohio. That's the site of the Crew Stadium there. This community authority on the screen right now is an outlet mall. It's the outlet mall north of Columbus in the Sunbury, Delaware area. It's called Berkshire Landing, and that outlet mall has a sales tax charge. There, the sales tax is spot specific to the mall, and it's used to fund the road networking in that area. So you can see how these items get into more commercial. Phil, you want to talk a little bit about Bridge Park? This is a kind of, I think this is a great example of commercial and residential and community building as well.
Yeah, you know, and I think I'm not sure if we mentioned this yet, but you know, an NCA is very diverse. So you can use it in Dublin, or you can use it in more rural areas, or, you know, it has a lot of flexibility with its uses. So, I mean, you know, here, you know, for those of you that are familiar, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bridge Park, but I mean, it is a top-notch mixed-use development, you know, in Dublin that, you know, has, you know, all the bells and whistles of what I think any of us would want in our communities. And what was, you know, interesting with this is, you know, they really leverage the NCA tool. You know, and as I mentioned, with NCAs, it enables, you know, the NCA itself can actually issue bonds.
Phil,
we lost your audio there.
Sorry.
So
now we can hear you.
And I'll fill in for a minute. So you get these assets like a pedestrian bridge, like open space for parkland, you know, the density. You can see this. All of this has been built. This is a rendering, but all of those assets have been built, including the 3 deep, you know, 7-story tall buildings, many of which are parking garages. So a community, Dublin, had the foresight to say, we want this type of density, so we are going to enable a community charge system so that the future users who come here, eat here, and, you know, rent here will pay for that on their side. Phil, you there?
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry. You know, last name of Angelo, I'm Italian. I started talking with my hands a little bit, and I yanked out my my earbuds. So I apologize for that. But you know, so you know, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with our port authorities. So what we're able to do here too is issue bonds through a port authority backed by this NCA revenue streams. You know, some of our port authorities have the ability to credit enhance. So, you know, now if you're the developer, you're getting an infusion of upfront financing, you know, and I think Caleb, was some of this done on tax exempt, some taxable? I don't recall actually, but regardless,
that's correct. There were various factors that went into that. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and if you think about it, I mean, this was not an easy geography to do all this, you know, near the river. I mean, so it was heavy infrastructure, and you know, the NCA charge enabled, you know, the parking garage. I mean, just there's a lot of different components that, candidly, you know, I know we're all familiar with TIFs and tax abatements and all that, but I really truly, without the NCA, you know, this would not have happened. And you know, and again, in a community like Dublin, you know, it truly, and I'm sure initially some people were kind of, oh, how's this going to fit into our community? But I think by all measures, it's world class.
Yeah, and I want to get at this question of like, what's the benefit to the community? Because you can see how the NCA tool can marry with a developer and make it work for them. But, you know, and this is another example of a community authority. This is in Hilliard, Ohio, where TIF plus community authority was married together. Using some of the other tools, tax abatements and TIFs plus community charges, you can do infrastructure. But how do communities do this? Well, you know, New Albany is a good example. This is a community that said, as a policy for all new development that comes into our town by annexation, we are going to have that development subjected to a community charge. And that community charge is going to be 9 mills of property tax. Every single new development that comes into our town as we develop out in an ex-urban space is by policy going to have a 9 mil property tax. And what happened is New Albany grew, more and more residential development was subject to the 9 mil charge. Values went up, so the charge has actually come down because the values have gone up and the millage has gone down. So now that charge is at about 4 mills, and it funded schools, it funded roads, it funded Center for the Performing Arts, it funded parks. This example is in Grove City, Ohio. Again, by policy, this community said, we're going to have a community charge over all these new areas surrounding a golf course so that the city of Grove City doesn't have to pay for the golf course and doesn't have to pay for the beautification. Another example, this is Powell, Ohio. Again, by policy, this community said new developments that are residential heavy are going to have to pay their own way. We don't want to burden our existing residents with the cost of the new. So if there is a new road that has to snake through a farmland to get to where these new houses are, guess who's going to pay for it? The new users, the people who live there. So from a community perspective, if you're a mayor or a city manager, you might think of this as a tool that can impact all of your development. It can be a policy. It can be a way for the community to take the new and the old and make them make sense together. When we have ex-urban growth in Ohio, you've got old communities where people have already bought in and paid their fair share. And then you have new developments that come along. Definitely makes sense to have the new development pay its fair share. So when you get to these millage-based examples where there's policies to just add all of the territory and make it, you know, a burden on all of the territory, what is that doing for a community's financials? It creates additional unvoted debt capacity. So you don't have to have a vote of the people to finance infrastructure. You have some debt capacity. I mentioned 4 mills in New Albany. And so that's really where you get at this concept of how can an NCA help a community. It can be very spot specific, or it can be really, you know, for the benefit of the community's fiscal altogether. I always think about community authorities with the policies in mind. No NCAs is the current prevailing policy in Northeast Ohio, but you could do large-scale developments, you could enhance that capacity, you could work with your schools, you could do an NCA for every development that comes along as policy, or you could just do it for the needy developers that need to get their garage and they're asking for it. So what do you think, Phil? Thoughts about how communities might use this as a policy?
Yeah, well, and I think it's important too for folks on the call to recognize that this does not, for those that are, you know, in government, this does not take away any of the authority of the municipality whatsoever. And we're not going to get into the minutia, but you know, you are equally represented on a board. It needs to be an NCA board gets formed. So, you know, listen, I know how sometimes the mentality here is you know, we all have our own communities, and you know, we have, I think, 50 some odd ones in Cuyahoga County, for example, and we don't, you know, we're leery of other, you know, political subdivisions sometimes, but truly this is not one that should be, I think, viewed in that vein. It is, as Caleb pointed out, it is only additive to, I think, your community and to make your community a more developer friendly, but again, but in a controlled environment, developer friendly, you know, with the NCA.
Well, thank you both. I know we're running a little close to time here, so just maybe some parting final thoughts, maybe the one main takeaway you want the audience to walk away from, and then knowing for everybody on the call that JobsOhio and Team Neo are here to continue the discussion, as I'm sure Caleb and Philip are as well, post this call. But after your final thoughts, Caleb and Philip, I know we are going to, please everyone just stay tuned for some final thoughts from Team Neo CEO, Bill Kaler as well.
Sure. Well, my final thought would definitely be this is a tool. It's additive. It's something that a community can really control. That point that Phil was making at the very end there is really important. city councils, city government, township government, you have a real role in how these developments come together. And so there is a partnership with the developer, of course, because they're the landowner, but you as a policymaker can set the tone, you can set the policy and really effectuate that partnership. So there's a healthy amount of control available to the municipalities. And as you can see, many of them have used it to their advantage to create real meaningful revenue streams for the general benefit of the municipality.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate everything Caleb just said. I mean, I think that's the important piece, is that, you know, you're controlling how how this community is gonna be formed, but you know, it is such a significant benefit. Again, hey, maybe we're gonna have a policy where all new development has, you know, a certain amount of mills, you know, levied on it. So it is beneficial, candidly, I think, in every respect. And I think too, when you look at all the other examples across Ohio where this has happened, you know, I mean, talk to those communities if you're concerned about, you know, maybe how's this going to interact with our power. I mean, those are slam dunk projects that I think if you talk to any of those leaders in those communities, 100 times out of 100, they would go back and do the exact same thing. You know, they probably wish they would have done NCAs earlier, you know, so